You're doing better than you actually think you are. In other words, you're actually richer than what you believe you have. All right, let's get into it. If this is the first time you're joining me, my name is Mel. This is Team You Finance, where we talk about leveling up, we talk about self growth, and we also talk about how to preserve our wealth in the long run. Now, I'm going to discuss with you 6 ways that you're actually leveling up, but you don't realize that you're leveling up. So, in other words, we're going to talk about patting ourselves on the back today. The first way that you're actually doing well is if you have a savings or you have some type of emergency fund that's put aside. Now, let me elaborate on that a little bit. I always talk about saving, I always talk about high yield savings accounts, I always talk about putting away money for a rainy day. But the question is, have we really been doing it, or how are you doing it? And if you're doing that and you're saving your money for a rainy day and you have at least a few months of living expenses put aside should there be an emergency, you're actually doing well. So they recommend that the average person that has their job that is trying to save some money have at least 3 to 6 months of savings put aside should an emergency arise. Now I say if you have at least 3 months of living expenses put aside, then you're doing really well because you're prepared should anything come up. Another way, or the second way that I think you're doing well and you're not really giving yourself credit for, is if you have some type of real estate investment. Now, let me elaborate on that. I always talk about owning a home because when you own a home, not only you're building long-term wealth, you're also building equity over the span of about 30 years. The average mortgage is about 30 years. So just think about it. If you buy a house today and 30 years from now, you keep that home, you make your payments on time, etc., and it grows. The equity in that house would have grown so much, and the real estate, when it's appraised again, would be worth a lot more than what you bought it for. So you have some type of investment in that. Now, everyone doesn't have to be a homeowner to actually be doing well. It doesn't matter where you live. If you have some type of real estate, it could be just an investment property or some type of business that you own or anything like that, where equity is growing, where you're making money off of it, you're basically doing really well because, again, you're learning and you're gaining long-term wealth at the same time. The third way that you can assess that you're actually doing well is if you have a small amount of debt. Now, I know, especially living in this country, the USA, everybody focuses on credit card debt, but it doesn't really matter where you live. Debt is debt. Whenever you owe somebody or you owe something or you have some type of commitment that you have to pay back, it could be a stressor. Any type of financial burden is bad. Any type of debt is bad. But if you look around and you see that your debt is smaller than what it was maybe a year ago or maybe even 6 months ago, you're doing really well. Now in the US, the average person has about $9,000 to $10,000 in credit card debt. That's the average person. Others might have less, others might have more. You might have a person have 20,000 in debt. Maybe somebody has 5,000 in debt. Maybe somebody has $100 in debt. I mean, I know 100 sounds like a really small number compared to some people, but debt is debt. Financial obligation is financial obligation. If you, whatever your numbers were, if you see that you're able to clear some of that up and you're able to pay some of it off, you're doing really, really well. Pat yourself on the back. The fourth way that I believe that we're doing well and we don't really recognize it is if you're investing in the stock market. Now let's talk about the stock market. Stock market is a great way for you to buy shares or to buy mutual funds. In other words, it's a great way for you to buy shares into a company. Okay, when those things are bought, they're basically getting return on your investment. You're gaining money, providing that those companies are doing well. Stock market is something where you put into it. It's not something that you live and think about all day, every day, but you know that in the end, should these stocks do well, then I'm able to make some money on it. So if you're able to buy stocks or you have a few shares in the stock markets or you have some mutual funds, you're doing really, really well. Another way that I believe that we're doing well that we're not giving ourselves credit for is when, number 5 is that we're not in competition with anybody. Now, that's actually a big one, believe it or not. In this day and age that we live in the social media age, we live in the social media generation. Everything is on IG, everything is on Facebook, TikTok, whatever it is that you follow. And everybody wants to show they're doing really well, they're growing, and sometimes that can make you feel a little bit small. But As long as mentally, you know you're not in competition with people for their money, you're not in competition with people for their job, their attire, whatever it is, you're not trying to follow anybody, you're actually doing pretty well. Because you don't need to compete with anybody except yourself if you decide to compete. Remember, you're your own self growth. You're the one that's going to push yourself to do better in the long run. As I always say and I always stress, you don't need anybody's validation approval to show or to prove that you're doing well. So if you're not in competition with anybody and you're doing well, you're not trying to compete with the Joneses, as they always say, pat yourself on the back. And the final way that I believe that you're actually doing pretty well is if you have some type of money that you're saving towards retirement. Now, when I started with number one, I talked about savings a lot. Retirement is, I'm not going to say it's a cliche subject, but it's a subject, it's a word that we hear about all the time. And a lot of us, we don't really jump on the bandwagon of retirement. A lot of people think they're going to be young forever. They think they're going to be at their jobs forever. I think the average person, providing you start working, at a young age when you're in your 20s, I think you have 40-something years to work. Yes, you have a long time to work, but we also have to remember that in the interim of that, things happen. Life happens. Okay, just a moment. If you haven't subscribed yet, or this is the first time you're joining me, again, my name is Mel. If this content resonates with you, please hit the like button, share this video, subscribe. Really appreciate your support in growing the channel. But what I was saying about retirement is that a lot of us tend to think that, we're going to stay young forever, we're going to be at a job forever. And sometimes we don't really put a lot of money into our retirement. That is something that we need to do. So if you, on your job, whether you're a business owner, you work for somebody, you're doing it privately, or you're saving for retirement, you're investing in a 401k, you're doing your company's pension, you open up something called a Roth IRA, whatever it is that you're doing to save for retirement or going towards retirement, you're actually doing pretty well. Now, I'm not saying that you have to necessarily have all 6 of these things that I mentioned to be doing well or pat yourself on the back. If you have at least 3, because I gave you 6 things, but I'm gonna stick in the middle, because sometimes, again, just like I just reiterated, emphasized, we're not in competition. Sometimes we tend to overdo it, trying to catch up with people. But if you have at least 3 of these things that you're doing rather well. Okay. For example, if you own a piece of real estate already, if you're investing in the stock market, or even if you're just saving some money, putting something down for a rainy day, you're doing well, because at the same time, you can basically count on yourself. You don't have to wait for anybody to do something for you should you run into a jam or a bind. That's really, really good. Now, I also wrote an ebook called 10 Steps to Leveling Up Your Money. If you get a chance, you could pick it up. Link is in the description. It just basically gives you some steps and some tips on accounts or moves that you can make in leveling up and growing your money and basically preparing. And in that ebook, I also talk about retirement. I talk about real estate. I talk about basic savings. I talk about all of those little things that we can do to grow and level up our wealth. Again, please subscribe, comment, like, and share if this content resonates with you. Now, I also want to have a conversation with you. In this video, in the comments, you can also put there what accounts or what type of savings you're doing, or what are some of the steps of the 6 steps that I gave you. What are some of the steps that you've taken to basically grow and to level up your wealth? As I said in the beginning of this video, you have to give yourself some credit. You have to pat yourself on the back and realize that you're doing well. Because self-growth starts with, self-motivation. If you're not feeling good about yourself, or you're waiting for people to tell you that you're doing well, it's going to be very hard for you to meet your goals or stand on those criteria or those objectives that you set to accomplish. So with that said, beautiful people, if you got this far in my message, I thank you for your time. I thank you for your attention. Again, level up, pat yourself on the back, and think about all the wonderful, wonderful accomplishments that you've made so far. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.